how do you help people bonk better? Do they come in with wounds off the gate, like you mentioned, of just like struggles and stories? Is it couples that come in that are struggling to connect intimately? And like, what's the common ground of things that you, always say, or, generally are like the meat and potatoes of ways that you help them?
Yeah, I do. I work with both couples and individuals. Sometimes I work with an individual because they're not even quite safe enough in their own body to express the trauma that they've experienced in front of their couple, in front of their partner.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it just really depends on who's coming with me on this journey. But no matter what, I run everybody through. The first thing is connecting to self-love. That's just like the premise of my work is radical self-love, radical self-acceptance. And then I run everybody through three different modules, if you will.
Cool.
The first one is soulful communication. Our words really carry so much weight. They can land, and like, you know how you've heard right the words where it's like, oh, that's like the best thing I've ever heard. It like lit me up. My heart is open. My body is turning into like this juicy primal yesness with words.
Mhm.
And we've also felt that with words that hit in the gut and like immediately twist and turn and make you really feel like vomiting.
Yeah, take
So
the wind out
our
of you. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. So really understanding how our words impact each other, but then also, especially with couples, learning how to hold space for one another. And that really looks like I'm listening with my full body. I'm not listening with my prefrontal cortex. I'm not trying to shame or judge or fix. I know that's where I always get stuck. My
Or
husband
think
could be,
about what you're going to say next, like while the
yes,
person's talking, and you're like,
yeah. Hmm.
I'm guilty of that too. And I know what that looks like on other people when they do it to me and I don't like it. So it's one of those things where you're like, dang it, I do that sometimes. And I hate it when other people do that. And, being really conscious of that is so
Hmm.
important.
Yeah. So taking couples and actually running them through practices where they're holding space for one another, where they're practicing those soulful communication tools. And then we move into emotional intelligence. And that's really taking a radical responsibility for your triggers, for your wounds, for your emotional response, which is, I think, one of the most sexiest things anybody can do is really own their emotion body. I know for the majority of men, that's so taboo. Men don't feel, men don't express, men don't talk about emotions. So I'd love taking down that barrier in partnership. And really in that module, we're really getting deep with each other. So when you see your partner really expressing and unveiling their inner wounds for maybe the first time, it's such clarity. So then with that information, you're avoiding conflict in the future. You're like, oh, okay, I see you're maybe in the kitchen freaking out about something, but that is really your little boy and he is not being seen and heard. So I immediately don't take that personally, which is such a bold step to do in partnership.
Mhm.
And I know the little boy's needs already because we've had that conversation in a held safe container. So I can go ahead and start meeting those needs before you even realize that you need them. And that really avoids conflict in so many ways and avoids creates resolution before it even begins.
Yeah. It's like dissolving of I think of like licking the fingers and putting it on the little candle and like,
Mhm.
just like,
Yes.
put it out. It's not a big deal. It's not a fire yet. And
Hmm.
don't take it personal.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That
like you
was,
said, I like how you did it. You're like, that's such a bold thing in relationships. And I was in my mind and I was like thinking in my head, yeah, like, fuck yeah, that is. Cause it's,
yeah.
and then when you're with that person and yeah, just so much good stuff that you shared there. For the language part and I don't know how you said it, conscious language, or what did you say?
Soulful communication.
Soulful
And
communication.
then
Yes.
some
And choosing
level.
words.
Mhm.
And one of the things we kind of said in the beginning about how there's certain things that people in relationships, romantic relationships can only teach you, or there's certain lessons you can, learn from that perspective or that angle. Where my mind was going was like, with that soulful communication part, the last guy I dated, wonderful guy, still friends, he was very affirming of like challenges. So my personality is very much like, I do hard shit and it's okay. And like, just, and there's been family, there's just been a lot, right? But I still like, I don't know, some sort of this like warrior spirit, right? He would often say things that I didn't even know I needed. So to the point of like figuring out what's nurturing for your inner child and da 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 da, he would say things like, oh my gosh, like that's so hard. That must have been so challenging for you. Like, wow. Like gave like really helped me look at the trauma and hard stuff I've overcome and like summit it and like look and be like, oh yeah, you're fucking right. Like, and I didn't know, I would have never known to ask that I needed someone to like, I don't know, like, you know, just kind of marinate in that, what it was hard a little bit. I'm more so just like surpassing the hard, you know? And I liked that. And I didn't know that I liked that until I knew that I liked that. Right. And that was
Yeah.
cool because through that dialogue and through learning, you know, and I know you work with couples on romantic connection and sex and things like that too. But like there's a lot of connection and intimacy in the words and the way that we communicate. And that was something I learned from that relationship, which was really cool. And just, yeah, knowing what word choice to use to nurture someone, or in many cases too, something I've learned is just like ask more questions instead of trying to solve more problems. Like just, oh, well, yeah, okay, so what do you think? Or just getting their wheels to turn instead of like spitfiring what we might think they need to do next, you know? And then of course there's moments, and I can think of moments where this particular partner would be like, no, I really want your coaching here. So like, I need you to tell, you know, and you're like, okay, cool. So then like we both coached. So it was like, you know, there's some moments where you're like, okay, how do we dance between the two hats of what we normally do and, you know, communicate and give input. And I think that was really helpful and being able to nurture that too. What was the second one that you said?
Emotional intelligence. So that's
Yeah.
really up leveling that emotional intelligence. So you can see each other. You can see each other's wounds.
Yeah.
You can identify the actual emotions that you're
Mhm.
feeling, which is a huge obstacle.
And then like you in that process too, and it's kind of like this exposing, getting naked, really
Yeah.
vulnerable process. But then in that process, I'm like, that's what makes us all cool, is like our dysfunctions and the shit that's like, you know, just that we're working on, but it's, you know, and I think I remember in that relationship too, getting vulnerable and admitting, because there was a lot of work and a lot of feelings coming up. And at first I wasn't going to face it, but then I was like, no, like there's a little bit of insecurity and jealousy there. And like, here's where she lives. And sometimes she like, you know, so like, that was like, and now, you know, once you start, you know, sharing those things, like you can't not. But I remember that was like that first like little like scab I picked off in terms of that openness and vulnerability in that relationship. And that was hard, but then the best thing ever, because then you're like, oh, now I can nurture that part. Now I can talk to her and look at her and, you know, like look at things from different perspectives. And so I share all of that only because when you gave that framework, I'm like, yeah, I can see how, you know, and then you start to learn more about what helps their younger self feel even more nurtured. And it's like this very beautiful, but it has to be a conscious dance. Like you mentioned, you know, all the things in all the world and all the stuff can be pulling at us, but we have to really be able to like stay solid and grounded and connected. So those are really powerful. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah. And it really supercharges vulnerability, which increases intimacy. And then that gets us into the third part that we work with. And that's sexual, I like to call it rediscovery. So it's a process of ditching all the conditionings, all the imprints, all the narratives of what we're told sex should be, especially in long-term partnerships. You know, it's going to get vanilla, it's going to get, and then that
I
gives
hate that
couples.
story. That's
I
not
know
my story, Melanie.
it is not my story, that's for sure. So this gives couples the opportunity to start rewriting and recreating what their love, sex, and relationship story is.
Mhm.
And then we get to dive into sacred sexuality, really bringing in the feel, the want, the tone, the passion that they want in partnership and in sex. And then they get to start creating their own rules and make their own dialogue of what sex is. And I guide couples in sacred practices, really teaching them. I teach everybody 12 holistic sex tools that every human has the ability to use, but they're usually never taught. And this stuff has to be taught. So that vulnerability that you do in the emotional intelligence upgrade really supercharges the pleasure in the final sexual discovery
Mm,
part of the
yeah.
container.
Could you share like two of the 12 tools?
Yeah,
Or
for
like,
sure.
yeah, could just like a couple like from that tool belt.
Yeah.
There's a lot. So yeah, don't want to go through that. And if somebody wants to work deeper with you, then of course they can. But what are a couple?
Yes. Well, breath is definitely number one. So if you are focusing on your breathing, if you are breathing into your sex organs, you can't really get lost in thought. So it's a supercharged way to up level your pleasure fast. And it's so quick because I even still find myself like lost. And like the other day, I was kind of writing my husband and I'm like, oh, what's next on my to-do list this afternoon? And then I was like, whoa, hold on a second.
Come back.
So come back. And so the quickest way for me to come back is to follow my breath. So I take a deep breath in and I send that breath with my mind all the way down, filling up my pelvic bowl. And then that awakens and creates sensations in my whole pelvic bowl. And then I am immediately right back into this delicious pleasure train that we're riding together. So
Mhm.
breath work is always one. If you find yourself in thoughts, you can't be thinking about some thoughts and actively focusing on your breath at the same time. It doesn't work.
I love breath work. Like I got
Yes.
certified to coach it and I do to certain clients here and there, but mainly because I wanted to learn for myself. I love like I love that was the first one that you mentioned too,
Mm-hmm.
because you just can always come back to your breath, always,
Mm-hmm.
anytime, no matter where you are, no matter what. And just the different feelings and sensations and places you can go. And sometimes I like can't feel my extremities and I'm like, where's my body? And I just love the journey that we can go on.
Mm-hmm.
Sober, nothing, nada,
Yep.
breath work on a little of an empty stomach, even better. And I just love that light lifted feeling. It feels so, oh my gosh. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
coming back to
Yeah.
our breath always is available.
Yeah. And you could, I mean, like you said, you can do a breathwork practice where you have a breath energy orgasm by sending your breath down to certain areas, by breathing, like a
Mhm.
connected breath,
Mhm.
no pause between the inhale and the
Yeah.
exhale, sending the breath directly into maybe your cervix, maybe your clit. And you just keep breathing in and circulating that breath, circulating that energy. And it can just supercharge your whole experience and
Mhm.
then leave you lit and vibrating kind of
Mhm.
throughout the whole entire day. So
So
juicy.
awesome. And that's
Yes.
like literally complete opposite to how most people are living day to day in this
Mhm.
stress, fight or flight, not
Mhm.
focusing on conscious connected breath and connecting breath flow to sexual organs and, having these like, and so sometimes people think, I can't ever, it's like, I can't do whatever. It's like, but you almost can't not because you're living in such a tight knot of stress, everything that, you know, being in touch and in tune with our body is such a gift, such a
Mhm.
gift.
Mhm. Yeah, and just for another one, if your audience is curious for more, movement. So really letting go of what you think your movement should look like in sex and following the instincts of your body. So even you just supercharge your body with breath and then you allow your body to move, to flow how she or he wants or they, and just let that body move. So I know that sometimes I get in the like, okay, it's like hip thrust, forward, back, hip thrust, forward, back, hip.
Mhm.
And then once I connect to like actually what my body desires, sometimes she's a swirly whirly. Sometimes she's like a side to side rocking motion. So letting, especially women, letting our hips free, letting them move how they want, it just can really unlock new levels of pleasure.